Hey guys, today we're talking about the Cold War heating up a little bit, and that takes place in the war in Korea. Our objective question today is, what were the effects of the Korean War? Cool. So prior to World War II, Japan had been expanding its empire, had been taking over areas in the Pacific, and one of those areas was Korea. So Korea is a little peninsula that sticks out off the coast of China, and Japan had annexed it and is controlling it leading up to World War II. Now, after Japan loses World War II, it's up to the Allies to decide what to do with all of their territories, which of course includes Korea. So, after the Japanese surrender and they lose World War II, the Allies have to decide what to do with it. Similar to the same way we decided what happened to Germany. Remember how we divided Germany up and started occupying it? Remember how we occupied Japan? We're also going to have to figure out what to do with all these other areas. So Korea is one of those. And what ends up happening is that the northern portion of Korea surrenders to the Soviet Union. The Soviets kind of start to occupy and take that over. And in the southern portion of the Korean peninsula, those people are going to surrender to the United States, and the United States is going to kind of occupy that area as well. So what we have is one peninsula, one country, kind of divided in half. And the division line that we end up using is a line called the 38th parallel. So that was kind of just an easy way to chop it in half and say, okay, north belongs to the Soviets, south belongs to the Americans. Of course, we start to kind of set up the kind of government and stuff we want to have in the areas that we're controlling. So very similar to Germany, the northern portion controlled by the Soviets is going to be communist, and the southern portion controlled by us is going to be free, democratic, the republic, right? Well, in 1950, the northern portion of Korea, controlled by the Soviets, right, or influenced by the Soviets, invades the southern portion of Korea. And this is really scary to us because remember, our policy at this point when it came to communism under Harry Truman was containment. We're not going out and fighting and defeating communism where it already exists, but what we are doing is protecting protecting other places from being taken over by communism. So this is exactly in the definition of containment what we need to get involved in, because what we have is a free southern portion of Korea that's now being attempted to be taken over by the communists. We can't let that happen. We each decide to start to fight. So the United States, as well as with a lot of other UN nations, United Nations, start to send troops over to the southern portion of Korea, and our job is to push the North Koreans back to their side and potentially further into North Korea, because now it's a war, right? The thing about Korea is that there was a lot of give and take in the beginning. The North Koreans, backed up by the Soviets, and then later China, pushed deep into South Korea. Then when the UN nations and Douglas MacArthur and the United States all show up in full force, we push the North Koreans back across the 38th parallel and then further into North Korea. So there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of wins and major losses. Douglas MacArthur is going to be the leader of not just the United States troops in Korea, but also the UN troops. So the same way that he was the supreme Allied commander of all troops in the Pacific in World War II, he's going to be trusted to be the the UN commander of all UN troops. And his side, of course, is on the South Korean side. Now, as the North Koreans get pushed back, it's not just the Soviets supporting North Korea, it's now China. Because as you remember what we talked about yesterday, China has recently fallen to communism as well under Mao Zedong. So now China starts to back up and reinforce the North Koreans. This is scary stuff. This is turning into a much bigger war than we originally thought. It's now no longer against North and South Korea. It's about the UN and the United States against the Soviets and the Chinese. And Douglas MacArthur, one to be a little bit, let's call him enthusiastic, he says that the best way to win this war is to push all of the North Koreans into China and then just bomb China and North Korea. That'll be the best way. We'll teach them a lesson. We'll show them to never square up to us again. We'll teach them that we're taking containment seriously. That'll be the best way. Besides, dropping a bomb on the Japanese worked to end World War II, so dropping a bomb on China will probably work to end the Korean War. Perfect, right? Unfortunately for MacArthur, Harry Truman doesn't kind of go along with this. Harry Truman, who, remember, he's the president, and even though he's not the supreme commander of UN troops in Korea, he is the commander-in-chief of the United States forces, which means he's the ultimate end-all be-all. And Truman's interested in fighting something he calls a limited war. He doesn't want to go all out and start dropping atomic bombs on everyone. If we use the atomic bomb to finish every single war we get in trouble with, we're going to end up nuking the entire world eventually. He wants to fight just enough to get the North Koreans back to North Korea, and then us say, okay, fine, they've learned their lesson, leave them alone. So we have two major leaders who have different views on how to end the war. As MacArthur is making his case to Truman over and over against bombing, Truman says, no, we're not doing that. And MacArthur makes a mistake. He goes behind Harry Truman's back, goes over his head, and starts to talk to the media about how he wants to do the total destruction plan. And this is obviously oversimplifying a very complex kind of interaction, but just to sum it up, MacArthur starts to talk about, I want to go bomb China. I think it's a good idea. Don't you all agree? And a lot of Americans go, yeah, we should. Tell Harry Truman that's what we want, right? And his idea was to drum up enough public support that Harry Truman would decide to go along with MacArthur's plan. But it doesn't work. You can't go behind a president's back. You can't one-up him. And this is going to lead... Well, first, let me just read you this, right? This is Douglas MacArthur. It seems strangely difficult for some to realize that here in Asia is where the communist conspirators have elected to make their play for global conquest. We must win. There's no substitute for victory. Douglas MacArthur saying, if we don't stand up for ourselves now, this is basically the first step to appeasement. And what's going to happen if we don't stand up to it? What's going to happen if we appease? The communists are going to take over the world, right? He's very concerned. Harry Truman, on the other hand, decides, that's it. I can't have some guy running around behind my back, one-upping me and trying to turn people against my ideals. He has to fire Douglas MacArthur. Here it is. I fired him because he wouldn't respect the authority of the president. That's the answer to that. I didn't fire him because he's a dumb son of a... Although he was. But that's not against the law for generals. If it was, 1/2 to 3/4 of them would be in jail. Dang, Harry Truman! So he is fired up. He says, you can't go behind the president's back. You can't go over my head. You can't try to turn people against me. And he fires Douglas MacArthur. Now, in the United States, this was very controversial. A lot of Americans were on Douglas MacArthur's side. And they wrote Harry Truman really nasty letters and hate mail. And it was really not great for Harry Truman's administration. Now, looking back with hindsight, I'll let you decide what the right, decision was. But Harry Truman decided to make the decision to relieve Douglas MacArthur of his position and continue to fight a limited war. Now, the war was so limited that it actually ends in a stalemate. Nobody wins the Korean War. The North Koreans, the South Koreans, China, the communists, the Soviets, the United States, the UN, nobody. It's a complete stalemate, which means it's basically a tie. Nobody wins or loses anything. In fact, it's so much a tie that North Korea is still divided the exact same line it was divided at before, and that's the 38th parallel. Now, still to this day, Korea remains divided at the 38th parallel. There's a little demilitarized zone that divides the two countries. It's a very dangerous place to be. Recently we've had some developments between North and South Korea. We'll see how that holds up. Anyway, another really important part about Korea is this is going to be the first war that we're going to fight in desegregated units. Harry Truman himself passes Executive Order 9981, and this is going to say that we're going to desegregate the military. Blacks, whites, anybody can fight together. Which is, a step in the right direction for sure. This is a good thing. Here's a satellite view of Korea. And here's the Korean War Memorial. If you went to DC with us at any point, then you saw this. It's really cool. Rain slickers, lots of rain there. Oh, here's this really cool thing. If you live in Korea, these are your options for haircuts. I think about 2% of the people at our school would fall into one of these categories. Everyone else would be in trouble for violating the standards. So anyway, lots to come out of the Korean War. Douglas MacArthur's fired. A very prominent military general is fired, right? Also, Korea's continued to be divided. The UN forces get involved. This is really cool because this is the first kind of major conflict within the Cold War. And the reason it's a Cold War war is because it's basically the United States versus the Soviets. And we're not fighting them face to face. We're not fighting them directly. We're fighting them in something called a proxy war. Proxy wars. We're fighting against the Soviets through another nation via, of course, the South Koreans and the North Koreans. So this will be the first of the major proxy wars of the Cold War. Alrighty, make sure to answer your objective questions. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.